You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you important and very useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And I just can't thank all of you enough. Our listeners are growing. We grow organically, and each and every day, more and more listeners, because so many of you are sharing our total show with friends and family. Some of you are sharing individual podcasts with them, and it's because of you. Our listeners are growing, and we continue to do this show we've been doing it for many, many years, and hopefully many years to come. So thank you for all that. And I know why you share with everybody is because we have great information and great guests on our show. And so, so many of you have listened to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. And it's just because of our great guests. And we again, I'm not going to disappoint you today. We have with us Dr. Richard Restak, who has published 25 books on the human brain, 3 of them New York Times bestsellers. His essays and articles have appeared in the Washington Post and the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Huffington Post, Vogue, and the American Scholar. He has been profiled in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and The Guardian. He is a past recipient of the Claude Bernard Science Journalism Award, given by the National Society for Medical Research. He served as president of the American Neuropsychiatric Association from 2005 to 2007. He's also lectured on brain and behavior to groups as varied as the Smithsonian, the 92nd Street Y, Library of Congress, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, at Goddard Space Flight Center, the Society of Statesmen, U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., the National Security Agency, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Department of State, the Foreign Service Institute, Washington, D.C., the Pentagon, Renaissance Weekend, Aspen Institute, Ruben Museum of Art, and the Brookings Institute. So, Dr. Restak, we still have some time to do the interview after that introduction, but I'll tell you, we're just honored to have you on Boomers Today. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm pleased to be here. Thank you, Frank.
Yeah. So I know you've written many books, but your most recent one, How to Prevent Dementia, Understanding and Managing Cognitive Decline. Tell us a little bit about that book and how it differs in a couple different ways. One, how is it different than maybe some of the other books you have written, kind of who's the target, and maybe how it also differs from, there are a lot of books written on dementia now. You go on Amazon, there's a ton of them. So how is this book different?
Yeah, thanks for that really excellent question, because I've written 25 books. The first, dozen or so were strictly information, if you want to understand how the brain works, and that was what they were aimed at. I did a couple of television books that were the companion volumes to The Brain and the Mind from the WGBAS. And then I moved on to things, I won't call them self-help books. I'll just say they're books that are based on what you can do with the knowledge that you have gained from reading my earlier books. I mean, what are the processes that are important to remember, and then how can you put them to application? Now, the book that we're talking about today, How to Prevent Dementia, is the actual title, but the subtitle actually is probably more along the lines of what I'm trying to do here. The subtitle is Understanding and Managing Cognitive Decline. So that means that this book was not just aimed at people, let's say, 60 or older. This is aimed at people that are in their 20s, 30s, 40s onward. It's everybody is going to experience some cognitive decline as they age unless they do something about it. So what can you do about it? And, of course, if you manage cognitive decline, then you've prevented dementia. So that's really what differs this book from others. Usually other books on dementia are sort of, I hate to put it this way, but sometimes they're aimed more at the people taking care of the dementia patients than they are the dementia patient themselves, because they may be interested or even, unfortunately, even capable of reading them. So that's how it differs. It's sort of like, if you're 25 or 30 or 35, what would you be doing today that might be helpful to you to retain cognitive efficiency and acuity? And cognitive, of course, is just a $10 word for thinking processes, your memory, your ability to store information, manipulate information in your mind, etc. So that's how that's how I look upon it as unique. I don't know of any other book that's aimed at a broad lifespan rather than just the older person. So maybe we should have taken the subtitle and made that the title.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. When do you, what does research show that at what age could cognitive decline begin?
Well, cognitive decline begins somewhere actually in the 20s and 30s. There's certain things that you're best at when you're in those age groups. And as the older you get, the more difficult the challenge is. That is, if you're not doing something to counteract it.
And so dementia, maybe I could just ask you, and this is probably a very basic question for someone like you. And I, as you know, I'm in the field and I deal with it all the time as well. But some of our listeners may not understand. Can you explain what is dementia and how does it differ from Alzheimer's?
Okay, if you think of dementia as an umbrella term, that's the one under which all of the other dementias are listed: Alzheimer's, the frontal temporal dementia, all the different ones. That
right. And there's a lot of them. People don't realize how many there are. Yeah.
So they're all dementias.
Right.
But each of those under that are certain types of degenerative diseases with specific names and specific pathologies. So that demens was the original word that had to do with insanity. And of course, originally, dementia was considered a form of insanity. It was psychiatrists that took care of people with dementia. But as time went on, starting with Alzheimer himself, 19th century, and going into the early 20th century, it became recognized that it was a brain disease. So it's more in the category of a neurologic illness than a psychiatric one.
So how can you kind of compare it maybe to, if it can be compared to other diseases? So for example, I mean, dementia is a disease, all right? So somebody, I'm sorry?
A degenerative disease.
A degenerative, okay. So let's say somebody who has heart disease or somebody that has cancer, maybe when they were younger, they could have done things differently, maybe their eating habits, their exercise, etc., to decrease the chance of them getting heart disease or cancer. Would you look at dementia in the same manner?
I think so. I mean, it is a progressive disease. So if one has it, then it's going to progress, but the degree and rapidity of progression can vary considerably with what we call cognitive reserve. And then people say, well, what's cognitive reserve? Think of financial reserve, and I use the example of somebody being involved in one of these floods or fires or something, and their home is burned or ruined by a flood. What occurs next is really a matter of how much financial reserve the person has. This may be their vacation home, and they just fly back to their penthouse somewhere in New York or Chicago, and it's not really affecting them that much because of the financial reserve is high. Someone else who has everything invested in their home, they're wiped out. So now if you think of that as a example, a person with cognitive reserve is someone who has over the years built up a lot of knowledge, established a lot of links and linkages within the brain, and they can take a lot more degeneration of their brain before they begin to show signs and symptoms of dementia, as opposed to somebody who really wasn't educated. So there's a list of things that really are associated with keeping your mind sharp. And these things I'm going to list now. They're not all original, but several of them you're not likely to see in other books written about dementia and cognitive decline. About 25 years ago, I became interested in the people who continued to be highly creative when they reached their 70s and 80s. I mean, people whose name was a household word. Daniel, Art Buchwald was an example, the humorist, Daniel Shore.
Right.
People like this, and I interviewed them, and I said, well, try to get what are the things that you think were important to you remaining creative. I came up with 10 things, and I'd like to just list them and explain them a little bit.
Sure, absolutely.
The first is education. Now, a lot of people, when they hear that, they say, oh, well, education. I mean, I finished school years ago, so I'm not going back to school. I'm not talking about school. I'm talking about a continued curiosity, which, of course, is the second thing, to keep learning something. I give an example in the book of going on a Egyptian tour, and everybody pretty much on it. It was a small tour, a dozen people, all men for some reason. I don't know why, but just particularly that's the way it was. And they were doctors and lawyers and entrepreneurs, but there was one person in the group who readily identified himself as working class. He, just said, I'm running a construction company back in Seattle. And I noticed that he not only knew a lot about Egyptian history, but he was right up there with the teacher. I mean, he had questions that wouldn't have occurred to us. And it got to the point that after a couple of days, often the teacher would say, after answering a question from one of us, he'd say, do you have anything to add to that? He'd turn over to this man. So I became very curious about how somebody who was running construction or on that would know so much about Egyptian history. So I befriended him. Mm-hmm. I found out that he remembered when he first learned about Egyptian history in grade school. And he found it so interesting. He just said, I just kept reading about it and learning, and my whole lifetime has been taken up with learning more about Egyptian history. Now, that's called curiosity. It's also called a magnificent obsession, is what I call it. In other words, you become obsessed with something in a good way. I'm not talking about a obsession which is unhealthy. But he was obsessed with Egypt and read about it, interviewed people, went on tours, all that. And as a result, he was mentally sharp in general, and then he was an in-depth knowledge of this. So we could talk about that's the education part I'm talking about, not going back to school.
Right, not just going back to school, right.
It's also part of the second thing, which is curiosity. Third is energy, which is trying to be energetic, trying to generate energy in any way you need to, so that you become across other people as an energetic, interesting person to be around. So to do that, you keep busy. You don't do a lot of sitting around, bemoaning things. Things could always be better. One of the other things is to accept inevitable limitations. There are certain limitations that come about, mental limitations I'm talking about now, which sort of mirror physical limitations. You can't run a 100-yard dash in less than 10 seconds when you're 90 years old, or how well you did when you were 20.
Right.
Accept that as a limitation of aging, and you don't worry about it. So that gets to the fifth characteristic of regular exercise and physical activity. Now, incidentally, activity and exercise do not necessarily break down into doing things that we would necessarily think about as exercise, running, lifting weights, and all that. If you take a mental exercise like chess, it's been shown at the highest level of chess that as many calories are burned by sitting and pondering a chess position as do with running along a certain track. Now, that was found during the Karpov-Kasparov tournament, in which Kasparov, who was the defending champion, as I remember, he began, looking more and more pale, lost weight, and stressed, they said, so they called the match off at the moment. And then someone got the idea, well, let's measure the caloric burning of people who are playing high-level chess, and they found that you do burn a lot of calories. So that activity doesn't necessarily have to be just physical, but you have to have some physical activity. Another thing we've already talked about is limitation acceptance, and the next thing, which I had down as 7, was the need for diversity. In other words, keep yourself diverse. You can have your magnificent obsession, but still have enough diversity in your life that you're able to contact with other people and interact with them. I mean, for instance, the man that I spoke about with Egypt, I mean, he wasn't just like that. He was interested in other people, and he was a good conversationalist and all this. So that's what you want to reach for. And you want to also have what I call psychological continuity across the lifespan, to the extent that you can. We're not always interested in the same things when we're in our 60s and 70s that we were in our 40s and 50s. And sometimes that's part of wisdom. Sometimes it's good. We recognize the limitations of things that we've been doing before, and that we should look for more connection with other people. As that gets to the next to the last of these, the diets, the building up of social networks and maintenance of friends. I always encourage people who are over 60 not just to keep up friendships with those who are their own age or older, but to make a deliberate attempt to try to be part of the social interaction and friendships with younger people. Sometimes people 20 years or more younger. Now, some people are afraid to do that. They say, well, because of this ageism, a lot of these younger people don't want anything to do with an older person. Well, you don't know that. My mother was 95, and she had many younger friends. She used to give advice, and she was thought a source of wisdom, which she was. And she was able to do this, and I said to her one time, well, what about those that might want to have as friends, but they don't want to be your friend because you're older? She said, I just say something nice about them or their family, and they then change their mind that they might want to get closer to me.
Right. Can I ask you something, about that? It's quite common that someone who is suffering from some sort of cognitive decline, it's common for them to go the other way. In other words, they're realizing that maybe they're not as sharp, and they may have been a social person, but now they're going the other way.
You make a good point.
Yeah.
This is after the disease has started and progressed to a certain point that they can't really hold conversations that they'd like to have, and they can't access information as they wished. I'm saying if you start earlier with the method of trying to interact with younger people, that when you're still, reasonably good and conversant, you then can pick up new information. I guess it's easiest to start within your own family. I mean, take some time to talk to your daughter-in-law, about things, son-in-law, that type of thing, and then move it out.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point.
My mother would have friends that would come in, have tea in the afternoon, and I guess some of them would talk to her about how their dates were going and all this. Some of them were reasonably young when my mother was 60 or 70 years of age. Some of them had to be in their 30s. She just was interested in them as people and, was questioning them and giving them advice and all this. Yeah,
good. Sorry to interrupt. I think you maybe had one more point you want to bring up?
That was really
That was it? Okay, great. So what? Yeah. So what do you say? The old saying of, someone who's retired and they put a sign up on their door that says "Gone fishing," and they're kind of done. They've had a lot of interaction with people. They turn 65 or whatever historically the magic number was. Maybe that has changed, and then they just they're not interacting as much anymore. What thoughts do you have there for people like that?
Have to force themselves. I mean, there are people that are more social than others. That goes from childhood. Some children like to be with others, and there's some of them that are kind of loners, but they still can socialize and will. So they have to encourage themselves, push themselves a little bit. I give the example of what are your interests? What have you really been interested in? And then try to find a social group that is interested in that. For instance, you might be a man or woman who has collected pens or watches or something over your lifetime, some interest in that. You might want to find a watch club or a pen club in your neighborhood. Get together. That gets you together with people that not only do you talk about watches and pens, but you can be talking about all kinds of other things, and that's the socialization part of it. It often leads to new friendships, to new social groups. The other thing that I recommend with people can start in their 30s or 40s are dining clubs.
That's right. Right.
Yeah, you go out to different restaurants, different places. You can have gourmet-style things. Le Chien, for instance, which is a club for people who want to go to gourmet. It's quite expensive, but it's
but you don't have. But you could still do it and not be going to expensive restaurants.
Absolutely, it doesn't need any kind of sponsors or anything like that. I mean, you can just do it. Get together with people. I have several lunch groups I get together with. We just get together and talk. Sometimes we have a topic we want to discuss ahead of time.
Yeah, great.
Other times we just talk about whatever seems to come up.
Good. So, Dr. Restak, we're going to take a real quick break, I promise, just to recognize our sponsor. And then when we come back, give you the opportunity to let people know how they could get your book and learn more about all the wonderful things you're doing. And then we'll get into a couple specific questions as well regarding, games and reading and maybe technology, good or bad. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about that when we come back. So do you know anyone who may be concerned about an older driver? Well, Senior Care Authority's Beyond Driving with Dignity program is a facilitated self-assessment program for older drivers. The program has been designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make appropriate decisions regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then the individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So to learn more, go to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com or call 877-907-8841 to connect with a Senior Care Authority advisor in your area. So we are back with Dr. Richard Restak, who's written 25 books on the human brain, and his most recent one, How to Prevent Dementia, we've been talking about. So Dr. Restak, before I get into maybe some of our final couple questions, tell us more, how people can get the book, and anything else you'd like to share with our listeners.
Well, I just want to pick up again on that, what we were talking about at the break, about socialization. To say to people, look, you've got to get more social and you've got to get mixed around with more people, that's really sort of it's not very helpful in terms of giving the specifics. What people are looking for is a specific way of doing this. And I suggested the clubs, eating clubs, watch, pen, whatever your interest is, try to find a group of people that are interested in that and then join these clubs. So that was what I was there.
Gotcha.
So I guess
right.
the final thing that I would just say again is looking upon life as a journey, and towards the time of getting older, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to come down with a degenerative nervous system disease, and you can do things to help lower the odds. Now, once again, it's a statistical thing. I mean, there's no one way that anybody can tell you, if you just do this, you're going to live to be 100, you're going to be mentally sharp and all. It just don't work that way. We understand now that genetics does play a role. But you can counteract many of these forms by the methods that I mentioned in my book about overcoming dementia, or how to prevent dementia. And I guess the underlying title, Understanding and Managing Cognitive Decline, is the task that we all have from our 20s, 30s on. So it's a book really aimed at anybody that wants to be able to function at their best. The most important thing is to develop memory. And I give in there how to develop superpower memories. It's very easy to do. I mean, it's just methods that you can use that are time-tested. So that would be sort of my final thoughts on what we've discussed.
Great. So what about suggestions relating to just some of the, people say, well, I play games on my phone. I read. I'm on my computer all the time. I mean, some of those things. What suggestions do you have? Are there type of games that are good? Is there type of reading that's better than other? Is technology a good thing or a bad thing? So I know it's a loaded question, but maybe we could finish up with that.
Sure. The technology can be good or bad depending on how it's used. I mean, if you're going to download your whole memory onto your phone so that when you make a grocery list, you go to the store and just walk down the aisles reading it from your phone. I mean, that's ridiculous. You're not testing your memory. Your memory is not even involved. You've short-circuited your memory. The way to do it is to go to this place, try to remember everything that you can, and look at the list you made, and then go without any further help to gather everything, and then at the end check the list again. That way you're not going to miss anything. Well, what you've done is you've use the phone as an accessory. You didn't use it as the primary source of memory. So that's one of the big things that you really have to do. Now, in terms of games and things like that, you can do what's of interest to you. I mean, if something is of interest and it piques your enthusiasm, you get up every day wanting to do the crossword puzzle, that's going to help you. But if you do it as a sort of a chore and say, well, I've never really like crossword puzzles, that actually fits me as well. I don't do crossword puzzles. It's just not interested in that. But I do things that are interesting. I mean, that the most important is to develop what's called a working memory. And in that book, I explain that very clearly. If you named all the presidents from Biden back to FDR, you name them and then you do them backwards, and you name the Democrats, and you name the Republicans in that grouping. All this is mental, all in your head. Nothing's written down. And you do them alphabetically. It's not hard to do after a while, but initially, and that's a working memory. You're taking memory components and you're twisting them around. Now, I have never, in all my years of running a medical neurologic psychiatric practice, I've never encountered anybody with dementia who had a working memory that was normal. If you would just maintain your working memory, you will may take many steps towards preventing dementia and managing cognitive decline.
Great. Well, this has just been fantastic. So I assume the book, you could get it on Amazon and through wherever means people go, online or at the bookstore, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you so much, Dr. Restak, for joining us on Boomers today. Really appreciate it. Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you, everybody. Please be safe out there. And we will talk to everybody next week.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.